The night everything broke was painfully ordinary. There was no storm outside the Whitmore estate. No shattered glass. No screaming. Just the quiet hum of recessed lighting and the faint scent of jasmine from the candles Elena had lit before dinner. She had always liked soft lighting. It made the house feel warmer than it actually was. Daniel preferred bright lights, sharp lines, clean surfaces, things that looked expensive. She was in his study only because her laptop had died. She needed to review a proposal for a freelance interior project. She'd secretly taken on her first piece of work in 3 years. The leather chair felt too large for her, the mahogany desk too imposing. Everything in this house had been chosen after their wedding, curated to match Daniel's rise in the corporate world. Sleek, controlled, impressive. Her eyes drifted to the open browser window on his desktop. A banking alert. She wouldn't have looked twice if the amount hadn't been so specific. $8,460. Charged to a private account she didn't recognize. Location, the Halcyon Grand Hotel. 2 guests. Her pulse slowed instead of quickened. That was what scared her. Elena clicked the charge. A confirmation page opened. A penthouse suite. Champagne service. Late checkout. Tonight her fingers hovered over the mouse. She wasn't snooping. She wasn't digging. The evidence had simply been placed in front of her like a wrapped gift she never asked for. 7 years of marriage, and this was how it unraveled. Daniel came home an hour later, loosening his tie as he stepped inside, looking every bit the polished executive featured in business magazines. His smile was easy when he saw her sitting at the dining table. "You're still up?" he asked casually. "You didn't have to wait for me." Elena didn't answer. She had moved from the study to the dining room so she wouldn't feel trapped. The laptop sat open between them like a silent witness. Daniel approached, kissing her temple as he always did. It felt mechanical now, rehearsed. "What's wrong?" She turned the screen toward him. For a second, just one, his expression flickered. Then it settled. He didn't lunge for the laptop. He didn't deny it. He exhaled. "It's not what you think." The words were so predictable, they almost made her laugh. "Then tell me what it is." He removed his watch slowly, placing it on the table with careful precision. "It was one night. A mistake. I was stressed. You've been distant lately." Distant. Elena felt something inside her chest collapse inward. She had given up her design firm when he relocated for his promotion. She had endured fertility treatments because he insisted they needed an heir before he turned 30. She had smiled through family dinners where she was introduced as Daniel's wife, never Elena, the architect. And she was distant. "It meant nothing," he continued, his voice firm, reasonable, as if presenting quarterly results. "You're still my wife." There it was. Ownership disguised as reassurance. She studied him as if seeing him for the first time. The sharp jaw, the controlled tone, the confidence that she would absorb this and move on. Because she always had. "How long?" she asked quietly. "It doesn't matter. How long, Daniel?" "A few months." He ran a hand through his hair. It wasn't emotional. A few months, while she was injecting hormones into her body, while she was planning nursery layouts he had asked for. Her hands felt cold. "I gave you everything," she whispered. "And I provide everything," he shot back, irritation seeping through. "This house, security, stability. You think marriages survive without compromise?" Compromise. Elena stood slowly. For years, she had felt alone in small, invisible ways. In the way he corrected her in public. In the way he dismissed her ideas. In the way his family spoke about legacy, as if she was simply the vessel. But tonight stripped away the illusion. She wasn't lonely because marriage was difficult. She was lonely because she had married a man who never saw her as equal. "I'm filing for divorce," she said. Silence filled the room. Daniel blinked once, as if recalculating. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm not." His expression hardened. "You're upset. I understand. But you'll calm down. I won't." The shift in his posture was immediate. Less charm, more command. "You walk away from this," he said quietly, "and you walk away from everything." "I already have," she replied. For the first time, anger flared openly in his eyes. "You think you can survive without this family? Without my name? My support?" He stepped closer. "You have no idea what walking away costs." She held his gaze. "I'd rather pay the price," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "than live like this." The next morning, she met with a lawyer. By evening, the papers were drafted. Daniel refused to sign. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He simply leaned back in his chair and slid the documents aside. "You don't know what walking away from this family costs," he repeated, softer this time. "More dangerous. But you will." And as Elena stepped out of his office, her heart pounding but her spine straight, she understood something chilling. Her divorce wasn't going to be simple. It was going to be a war. The first thing Elena noticed about the Whitmore estate that evening was how unchanged it looked. The fountains still ran in perfect symmetry. The marble steps still gleamed under golden lights. The house stood as it always had, grand, composed, untouchable. It was almost offensive how nothing in its architecture reflected the fracture in her life. Daniel insisted she attend the monthly family dinner, despite the divorce papers sitting unsigned in his study. Until its final, he had said coolly, "You are still my wife." The statement wasn't affectionate. It was territorial. Elena stepped out of the car wearing a black silk dress she hadn't worn in years. It wasn't chosen to impress. It was chosen because it made her feel armored. Her reflection in the tinted car window showed a woman more composed than she felt. But there was something different in her eyes, now something sharpened. Inside, the air was thick with wealth and expectation. Crystal chandeliers illuminated polished floors, and portraits of Whitmore patriarchs lined the walls like silent judges. Conversations softened when she entered. They had all heard. In families like this, secrets traveled faster than apologies. Daniel's mother greeted her with a smile too tight to be sincere. "Elena, darling, you look well." The implication hung unspoken. "You shouldn't." Elena returned the smile politely and moved further into the room, refusing to scan for Daniel. She would not measure her stability by where he stood. That was when she felt it, not a touch, not a sound, a presence. Across the room, near the fireplace, stood a man she had only seen in photographs years ago. Taller than Daniel, broader in the shoulders. His posture wasn't decorative like the others. It was deliberate, controlled. He wore a charcoal suit without a tie, as if he had no interest in blending into family formalities. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were not. They were observant, assessing, patient. Alexander Whitmore, Daniel's older brother, the brother who had walked away from the family empire, 6 years ago and built something larger on his own. The one Daniel never mentioned, without a trace of irritation tightening his jaw. Elena felt a ripple of awareness. She couldn't explain. She had expected arrogance. Instead, there was restraint. The kind of quiet that belonged to someone who did not need to raise his voice to command a room. Daniel followed her gaze and stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Ignore him," he muttered under his breath. "He enjoys spectacle." Before Elena could respond, Alexander crossed the room. Not hurried, not hesitant. Each step measured when he stopped in front of her. The room seemed to shift in subtle gravity. "Elena," he said, his voice low and even. It was not a question. It was acknowledgement. "Alexander," she replied, surprised at how steady her tone remained. His eyes lingered on her face, not in appraisal of beauty, but as if searching for something beneath the surface. "I heard there were changes," he said, the corner of his mouth curving slightly. "I don't trust second-hand information." Daniel moved closer, inserting himself into the space. "There's nothing to discuss." Alexander didn't look at him. "I wasn't speaking to you." The tension was immediate and electric, subtle enough to avoid a scene, sharp enough to cut. Elena sensed that this was not a simple sibling rivalry. This was history layered with unfinished wars. Dinner unfolded with polite conversation and concealed daggers. Daniel's father spoke about legacy, about unity, about loyalty, words that suddenly felt weighted. Daniel's hand occasionally brushed Elena's back, a reminder of possession. Each time, she resisted the urge to step away visibly. Halfway through the meal, a comment slipped too far. "If divorce becomes public," Daniel's mother said carefully, "it could destabilize investor confidence." There it was. Not heartbreak, not concern, reputation. Alexander leaned back in his chair, folding his hands loosely. "Investors don't fear divorce," he said calmly. "They fear instability in leadership." The implication was surgical. Daniel's jaw tightened. Careful, Alexander finally turned his gaze toward him. It was not hostile. It was certain. "You always mistake confidence for control, Daniel." The room fell silent. Elena felt something unexpected rise inside her, not fear, not relief, but recognition. For the first time since filing for divorce, she did not feel alone in the room. As dinner concluded, guests dispersed toward the terrace. Elena stepped outside for air, the cool night brushing against her heated skin. She gripped the balcony railing, breathing slowly. "You shouldn't stand out here alone." She didn't turn immediately. She knew the voice. "I'm not alone," she replied quietly. Alexander stepped beside her, leaving a respectful distance. The city lights stretched below them like scattered stars. "You filed for divorce?" he said, not asking, bubble quotes, "yes," and he refused. Her pulse flickered. "How do you know that?" He glanced at her, and there was something in his expression that shifted the ground beneath her feet. "Because I know my brother," he said, "and I know how this family operates." The air between them thickened with unspoken understanding. Elena turned slightly toward him. "Why are you telling me this?" Alexander's gaze held hers steadily. "Because wars in this house are never about emotion," he said. "They're about leverage." A pause. "And you," he added softly, "are about to become one." A chill ran down her spine, not from fear, but from realization. Her divorce was not just personal, it was strategic, and Alexander Whitmore had just stepped onto the battlefield. The morning after the family dinner, Elena received an email that did not surprise her, yet still managed to hollow her out. It was brief, formal, and devastatingly precise. Her personal credit line had been suspended pending review. The shared investment account she had partial access to required dual authorization for withdrawals. Even the payments scheduled for her father's rehabilitation center had been flagged for confirmation. There was no signature at the bottom of the notice, but there didn't need to be one. Daniel had begun tightening the perimeter. She stared at the screen in her downtown apartment, the sunlight pouring through tall glass windows that suddenly felt less like opportunity and more like exposure. 3 weeks ago, she had walked out of a mansion believing freedom would feel expansive. Instead, it felt precarious. Daniel hadn't shouted. He hadn't pleaded. He had simply shifted pieces on a board she hadn't realized they were playing on. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "We need to talk. You're making this unnecessarily difficult. Unnecessarily." The word lingered like an accusation. She typed nothing back. An hour later, she was summoned, not invited to his office at Whitmore Holdings. The building loomed over the financial district, steel and glass reflecting the sky like a mirror that refused to reveal its interior. Elena walked through the revolving doors with her spine straight, aware of the curious glances from employees who still recognized her as Mrs. Whitmore. The title felt foreign now. Daniel was waiting in his corner office, city skyline stretching behind him like a symbol of conquest. He did not offer her a seat. Instead, he handed her a folder. "You've been removed from discretionary access to joint accounts," he said smoothly, "until we resolve this situation." "Resolve," she repeated softly. "You mean until I withdraw the divorce?" He didn't deny it. "You're acting emotionally." "I'm acting rationally. My father's treatment is not a negotiation tactic," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor building beneath her ribs. Daniel's expression sharpened. "Everything is a negotiation tactic. You know that. You were part of this world long enough to understand it." "No," she said quietly. "I was married to you long enough to misunderstand it." His jaw tightened. "Be careful, Elena. You don't have the resources to fight this out in court. My legal team will drag this for years. You'll be drained before it's over." She felt the truth in his words. That was what made them dangerous. Daniel didn't need to threaten her physically. He could suffocate her financially and call it strategy. Before she could respond, a knock interrupted the tension. Daniel's assistant stepped inside, her expression slightly unsettled. "Sir, Mr. Whitmore is here." Daniel's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "Which one?" he asked, though they both knew. Alexander. The silence that followed was not empty. It was charged. Alexander entered without waiting for permission, his presence altering the temperature of the room in a way Elena could not rationalize. He wore a navy suit this time, crisp and unadorned, his expression composed but not polite. His eyes moved from Daniel to Elena and back again, assessing, calculating. "I wasn't aware this was a family counseling session," he said mildly. Daniel's voice hardened. "This is company business." Alexander stepped further inside, closing the door behind him with deliberate calm. "Then perhaps it's fortunate that I own 12% of this company." Elena's breath caught. She had known he was successful, but not that he held direct influence here. Daniel's face darkened. "You sold your stake years ago." "I reacquired it," Alexander replied evenly. "Recently, the implications settled like falling ash. This wasn't coincidence." This was positioning. Alexander's gaze shifted to Elena. Are you being coerced into financial submission? The bluntness of the question cut through the room. Daniel laughed once, sharp and humorless. Don't dramatize this. I prefer clarity, Alexander said. Elena felt the ground tilt beneath her. She had assumed she was fighting alone, cornered by a system built long before she entered it. But this was different. This was someone stepping into the arena not with emotion, but with leverage. I don't need rescuing, she said carefully, though her pulse betrayed her. Alexander's eyes held hers, steady and unreadable. Good, he replied, because I don't rescue. I restructure. Daniel moved around his desk, irritation barely contained. Stay out of this. Alexander's response was calm enough to be lethal. You made it my business the moment you weaponized family assets. The room felt smaller now, the skyline behind them insignificant compared to the power struggle unfolding inside it. Elena understood something crucial in that moment. Her divorce was no longer a private unraveling. It had become a fracture line inside a dynasty. Daniel turned to her, voice low and dangerous. If you continue down this path, you won't just lose money. You'll lose protection. Elena met his gaze without flinching. Protection from what? His silence was answer enough. Alexander stepped slightly closer, not touching her, not shielding her, but aligning himself in quiet defiance. From him, he said softly, and for the first time since filing for divorce, Elena sensed that the cost Daniel warned her about was real. But so was the possibility that someone else understood exactly how to make him pay it. By the end of the week, Elena understood something with terrifying clarity. Daniel was not trying to win her back. He was trying to exhaust her. The legal letters began arriving in controlled waves. Motions to contest asset division. Requests for documentation stretching back years. Subtle insinuations that she had been financially irresponsible during the marriage. It was not loud aggression. It was suffocation by paper. Every envelope felt like a reminder that Daniel knew the system better than she ever had. Her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Marissa Cole, did not sugarcoat the situation. He's not trying to defeat you quickly, she said during their meeting in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the river. He's trying to make this expensive and psychologically draining. I don't have unlimited funds, Elena admitted quietly. Marissa studied her for a long moment. You don't have to tell me who is backing him. But if you want this to move forward efficiently, you'll need leverage. Leverage. The word followed her like a shadow that evening. As she walked into her apartment building, the concierge informed her she had a visitor waiting upstairs. Elena felt her pulse spike immediately. Daniel had already crossed enough boundaries. She would not tolerate him showing up unannounced when she opened her apartment door. It was not Daniel standing by the window, it was Alexander. He did not look surprised to see her. He did not look apologetic either. He stood in her living room as if he had always known the dimensions of it, hands in his pockets. Posture relaxed but alert. You changed the security code, she said evenly. Closing the door behind her, double quotes, yes. How did you get in? I asked. That answer should have irritated her. Instead, it unsettled her in a deeper way. Nothing about him felt reckless. Everything felt intentional. You shouldn't be here, she said. You're being buried in legal maneuvering, he replied calmly. I assume you've noticed. She exhaled slowly, removing her coat. And you're here to say, what? That you predicted it. I'm here because Daniel has underestimated how visible his tactics are. She crossed her arms. This is between me and him. No, Alexander corrected quietly. It stopped being between you and him the moment he involved company resources. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You're enjoying this. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. I don't enjoy watching power abused. And what do you call what you're doing? She asked. Buying shares, appearing at strategic moments, standing behind me at board meetings. Is that not power? He stepped closer, not invading, but shifting the air between them. The difference, he said evenly, is consent. The word lingered. Elena felt a subtle shift inside her. Daniel had always framed protection as ownership. Alexander framed influence as choice. It was a dangerous distinction, because it made her question everything she had tolerated. You don't need to fight my battles, she said. I'm not, he replied. I'm positioning you so you can win them. Silence stretched between them, thick but not uncomfortable. She could feel the weight of his gaze, not hungry, not intrusive, but assessing her strength as if recalibrating his expectations. You knew this would escalate. She said quietly, yes, and you waited. Yes, why? His jaw tightened slightly, as though the answer carried history. Because until you filed for divorce, you were still defending him. The truth of it struck deeper than she wanted to admit. She had made excuses for Daniel for years, smoothed over his arrogance, rationalized his control. Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at it briefly before looking back at her. He's filed a motion to delay proceedings indefinitely. Her stomach dropped. On what grounds? On the grounds that reconciliation is possible and divorce would damage family interests. A bitter laugh escaped her. Family interests. Alexander's gaze sharpened. He's not just fighting to keep you. He's fighting to avoid losing face. And what are you fighting for? She asked softly. The question hung between them like a wire pulled too tight. He stepped closer now, close enough that she could see the faint scar near his temple, the subtle tension beneath his composure. I fight for balance, he said quietly, and right now the scales are uneven. She searched his expression for ego, for ambition, for hidden motives. What she found instead was certainty. Her pulse quickened not from fear, but from the realization that she was standing beside someone who did not raise his voice to assert dominance. He simply shifted outcomes. You can't protect me from everything, she whispered. He did not smile. I don't intend to protect you from everything, he replied. Only from him. And in that moment, Elena understood the shift had already begun. This was no longer a crumbling marriage. It was the opening move of something far larger, and Alexander Whitmore had just made it clear he was playing to win. The invitation arrived embossed in gold, as if elegance could disguise intent. The Whitmore Foundation's annual charity gala had always been Daniel's stage, a place where donors applauded his leadership and journalists praised his vision. Elena had attended every year as the poised wife at his side, smiling for photographs, adjusting her expression to fit whatever narrative the family required. This year, her name was printed alone. She stared at the card for a long time before deciding she would go. Not to provoke Daniel, not to lean on Alexander, but because retreating would be exactly what Daniel expected. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and the low murmur of curated power. Elena stepped inside wearing deep emerald silk, the color chosen not for softness but for impact. Conversations faltered for a fraction of a second when she entered, and she felt the shift ripple through the room. The press had already caught whispers of the divorce proceedings. Speculation floated like perfume. Daniel spotted her almost immediately. He crossed the floor with controlled confidence, offering the kind of smile that photographs well but never reaches the eyes. "You look radiant," he said smoothly, as though they had not been at war for weeks. "I look independent," she replied calmly. His fingers brushed her elbow in a gesture that could be mistaken for affection. "Let's not create a spectacle tonight. The board is watching." "Then perhaps you shouldn't treat me like an accessory," she said quietly. His jaw tightened, but he maintained the performance. He guided her toward a cluster of investors and introduced her with deliberate emphasis. "Elena has been under a great deal of emotional strain lately," he said, his tone sympathetic. "Transitions can be difficult." The implication was surgical, fragile, unstable. Elena held her composure, but she felt the subtle humiliation settle over the exchange. This was Daniel's strategy. Not shouting, not threats, but slow erosion of credibility. Before she could respond, another voice entered the circle. "Emotional strain builds resilience," Alexander said evenly. The group shifted, attention redirecting. He stood beside Elena without touching her, his presence altering the geometry of the space. Unlike Daniel, he did not perform for the room. He occupied it. Daniel's smile thinned. "I wasn't aware you would attend. I wasn't aware I needed permission." There was no raised volume, no overt hostility, but the tension between them was undeniable. Investors glanced between the brothers, sensing fault lines beneath the polished surface. Alexander's gaze moved briefly to Elena, and in that moment she felt something unfamiliar. Not rescue, not possession, but alignment. The evening progressed with curated speeches and artful networking. Yet beneath it ran a current of calculation. Halfway through the event, Elena excused herself and stepped onto the terrace for air. The city stretched below in glittering defiance, but she could still feel Daniel's subtle campaign unfolding inside. "You handled that." Well, she did not need to turn to know who had followed. He's trying to make me look unstable," she said quietly. "He's trying to make you look temporary." Alexander corrected. The words struck deeper than she expected. She turned to face him. "And what do you think I look like?" His eyes did not waver. Strategic, the compliment did not feel like flattery. It felt like assessment. Inside the ballroom, applause erupted. Daniel had taken the stage. His voice carried through the open doors, rich and confident. "Family," he began, "is the foundation of everything we build." Elena felt a bitter irony twist inside her. Alexander stepped closer. Not enough to invade, but enough that she felt the heat of his presence at her side. "He's about to announce an expansion," he said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because he needs a distraction." As if on cue, Daniel's speech shifted. "Whitmore Holdings is proud to announce a strategic merger that will secure our legacy for decades." Murmurs rippled through the guests. Elena felt the pieces moving even before she understood the pattern. Alexander's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. He didn't clear that with the board. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means he's overextending." The applause inside swelled again, but beneath it Elena sensed instability. Daniel was making bold moves to prove control, to prove strength, to prove he was untouchable. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. A message from Marissa. Daniel has filed a motion claiming emotional distress caused by public interference from family members. He's attempting to paint you as influenced by Alexander. The room seemed to tilt slightly. He's making it look like you're manipulating me, she said softly. Alexander's gaze sharpened, but his voice remained calm. He's trying to isolate you. A chill traced down her spine. And are you? He held her gaze for a long moment. If I were, you wouldn't be asking. The honesty in that response unsettled her more than any polished reassurance could have. Inside, Daniel concluded his speech to thunderous applause. Cameras flashed. Investors congratulated him. The image of unity held for now, but Elena could see the cracks as she turned back toward the ballroom. She realized tonight had not been about charity or reputation. It had been about dominance, and Daniel had just escalated the war publicly. Alexander remained beside her, steady and unreadable, but she could sense the shift in him too. The restraint was thinning, the calculation sharpening. The gala had been meant to remind her what she was walking away from. Instead, it revealed something far more dangerous. This was no longer just about divorce. It was about control of an empire, and she was standing at the center of it. The morning after the gala, the markets reacted before the family did. Whitmore Holdings stock dipped 3% at opening. It was not catastrophic, but it was noticeable. Analysts questioned the sudden merger Daniel had announced without formal board confirmation. Financial blogs speculated about internal fractures. The word instability began appearing in headlines. Elena watched the numbers shift across her tablet while sitting at her kitchen island, coffee untouched beside her. She understood very little about high-level finance, but she understood timing. Daniel had tried to project strength. Instead, he had exposed vulnerability. Her phone rang mid-morning. Not Daniel. Not her lawyer, Alexander. She let it ring twice before answering. I assume this isn't social. It never is, he replied evenly. Are you somewhere private? Yes, good. Daniel's merger partner withdrew preliminary approval this morning. Elena straightened slightly. Because of the stock drop. Because of internal governance concerns, he corrected. Several board members are questioning his authority. A ripple of realization moved through her. You did this. I presented information, he said calmly. The consequences were his. She walked to the window, staring down at the city moving in indifferent rhythm. You're escalating. He already did. Silence hovered between them, thick with unspoken awareness. Why are you really doing this? She asked quietly. There was a brief pause, not hesitation, but calculation. Because he's reckless when cornered. And you think I'm the corner. I think you're the catalyst. The words settled into her chest with weight. She had spent weeks feeling like collateral damage. Now she was being described as leverage. That afternoon, she received an unexpected visitor at her apartment building. Daniel's father. Richard Whitmore did not waste time with pleasantries. He entered her living room with the air of a man accustomed to obedience and surveyed the space, as if assessing a temporary inconvenience. You've made this unnecessarily complicated, he said without sitting. Elena remained standing. Your son made it complicated. You misunderstand how legacy functions, he replied coolly. Marriages within families like ours are structural. I'm not infrastructure, she said. His eyes narrowed slightly. You benefited from this structure, and Daniel benefited from my silence. The room cooled perceptibly. Richard clasped his hands behind his back. Withdraw the divorce, and this situation stabilizes. Continue, and you will find doors closing. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Social exclusion, professional isolation, financial suffocation. You're asking me to stay in a marriage to protect stock prices, she said quietly. I'm advising you to understand consequences. Before she could respond, another voice entered the doorway. Consequences are proportional, Alexander said. Elena had not heard the elevator. She had not heard the knock. He simply appeared, presence controlled and unhurried. Richard turned slowly. This does not concern you. It concerns corporate governance, Alexander replied evenly, and coercion. This is family. Alexander's gaze did not waver. Exactly. The air between father and son thickened with history. Elena could not fully see, but could feel. This was not just a disagreement over strategy. It was ideological. Richard's voice hardened. You walked away from this empire. I walked away from corruption, Alexander corrected calmly. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her once more. The conflict was larger than her marriage. It ran deeper than rivalry. Richard looked at her with cool appraisal. You are being influenced. I am being respected, she replied before she could reconsider. Silence dropped heavily. Alexander did not react outwardly, but something in his posture changed almost imperceptibly, as though a line had been crossed, not by hostility, but by acknowledgement. Richard's expression flattened. If this continues, you will both regret it. He left without another word. The door closed, but the tension remained. Elena turned to Alexander slowly. You shouldn't antagonize him. I'm not antagonizing, he said. I'm dismantling leverage, and if this destroys the company... It won't, he replied with quiet certainty, but it may destroy Daniel's control. The steadiness in his voice was not reckless. It was informed, strategic, dangerous. She studied him carefully. You're not just protecting me. No. Then what are you protecting? His gaze held hers, unflinching. Balance, he said again. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from recognition. Daniel fought to dominate. His father fought to preserve legacy. Alexander fought to recalibrate power. And somewhere within that recalibration, she stood at the fulcrum. Outside, the city moved as usual. Inside her apartment, a quiet war was unfolding between generations. Her divorce was no longer a private unraveling. It was destabilizing a dynasty, and Alexander Whitmore had just made it clear he was willing to let it burn if necessary. By the time the rumors broke publicly, Elena was no longer surprised by the cruelty of strategy. It started with a headline at 6:12 a.m. Whitmore heirs divorce linked to corporate instability. The article was carefully written, legally cautious, but devastating in implication. Anonymous sources suggested that Elena's emotional volatility had influenced board dynamics. It hinted that Alexander's recent stock acquisition was less about governance and more about personal interference. There were no direct accusations, yet the narrative was clear. She was the fracture point, and Alexander was exploiting it. Elena read the piece twice before setting her phone down. The framing was too precise to be accidental. Daniel hadn't lashed out impulsively. He had curated perception. Her inbox flooded within the hour. Invitations withdrawn. A design collaboration postponed until matters settled. Even her father's rehabilitation center sent a discreet inquiry about payment confirmation for the next quarter. Daniel had moved from containment to character assassination. She was still staring at the window when her phone buzzed again. "Alexander, I assume you've seen it," he said without greeting. "Yes, they released it through a subsidiary media partner," he continued evenly. "Indirect enough to deny involvement." Elena felt the weight of it settle deeper than anger. "He's isolating me professionally." "He's trying to provoke you publicly," Alexander replied. "If you react emotionally, it validates the narrative." "I am emotional," she said quietly. "I'm furious. And that," he said, his tone sharpening slightly, "is exactly why you cannot move impulsively." There was a brief silence. She could hear something faint on his end voices, the muted hum of a conference room. "You're in a meeting," she observed. I paused it. A strange flicker of warmth moved through her at that. Not because he paused a meeting, but because he did not dramatize the gesture. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Nothing publicly," he replied. Yet, the word yet lingered. By late afternoon, she made a decision of her own. She would not retreat indoors. She would attend the architectural symposium she had been invited 2 weeks ago. She would not cancel. The auditorium was filled with industry leaders, critics, designers who once respected her before she became Mrs. Whitmore. She felt their curiosity as she took her seat in the second row. Halfway through the keynote presentation, her phone vibrated from an unknown number. "You should have stayed quiet." Her stomach tightened. Another message followed. "Divorce is expensive. Reputation is priceless." She did not respond. Instead, she scanned the room carefully, instinctively searching for threat. It was irrational, perhaps, but the message carried something colder than Daniel's usual manipulation. When the session ended, she stepped into the lobby, heart pounding in steady rhythm rather than panic. She refused to look frightened. "Did he threaten you directly?" She turned sharply. Alexander stood near the exit, coat draped over his arm, expression composed but eyes razor-focused. "How did you know?" she asked. "I have alerts set on anything that mentions your name." The admission should have unsettled her. Instead, it steadied her. She handed him the phone. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he read the message. "This isn't Daniel." The certainty in his voice cut through her unease. "Then who?" "Someone trying to escalate," he said calmly. "Or someone who believes they benefit from chaos." Her pulse quickened. "Within the company?" "Possibly." He handed the phone back. "You're not just navigating divorce anymore. You're standing in the middle of a power redistribution." The air between them shifted, heavier now with something more dangerous than attraction. "Are you telling me I'm a liability?" she asked softly. His gaze locked onto hers, steady and unwavering. "I'm telling you that you're a catalyst." The word echoed again, but this time it felt less theoretical. "And if this gets uglier?" she asked. "It will," he replied without hesitation. A shiver ran down her spine, not entirely from fear. "And you're still here?" she pressed. He stepped closer, not touching, but closing the space in a way that made the world outside feel distant. "I don't retreat when pressure increases." Something in her chest tightened not with vulnerability, but with recognition of strength that did not need to advertise itself. "Daniel will think this is you," she said. "I'm counting on that." Her breath caught. "You want him distracted. I want him predictable." The precision of his thinking unsettled her in ways she couldn't articulate. He wasn't reacting. He was mapping. And what happens when he realizes he's not in control? She asked quietly. Alexander's eyes darkened slightly, not with anger, but with resolve. Then, he said evenly, he makes a mistake. The implication hung between them like an approaching storm. Elena felt the weight of the moment settle into something irreversible. The article, the anonymous message, the tightening circle of influence it, was no longer just about a broken marriage. It was about exposure, and someone was pushing the pressure higher. For the first time since filing for divorce, she felt a tremor of genuine fear, not of Daniel, but of what larger forces might be maneuvering behind him. Alexander held her gaze steadily, as though reading the shift in her thoughts. "Stay close to me," he said quietly. It wasn't possessive. It wasn't romantic. It was strategic. And for reasons she could not yet fully explain, it made her heart beat faster than any threat ever had. The next move did not come from Daniel. It came from the board. Elena learned that at 8:30 on a grey Tuesday morning when Marissa called with a tone that was too controlled to be casual. An emergency shareholders meeting had been scheduled for that afternoon. The agenda was vague, governance review and executive stability, but the implications were not. Daniel's unapproved merger announcement, the market fluctuation, the press narrative, and now the anonymous threats had converged into something combustible. "They're questioning his leadership," Marissa said quietly, "and they're questioning external influence." External influence. Elena knew exactly what that meant. By noon, the financial district buzzed with speculation. Reporters clustered near the Whitmore building, cameras angled like weapons. Elena watched the coverage from her apartment, feeling the tremor of events accelerating beyond personal grievance. This was no longer divorce. This was succession pressure. Her phone vibrated. "Alexander, be at the building at 2:15. Use the side entrance." No explanation. No elaboration. She arrived precisely at the time he specified. The side entrance was discreet, guarded by a single security officer who nodded her through without question. That detail alone told her how much influence Alexander now held. Inside, the corridors felt colder than usual. Assistants moved briskly, avoiding eye contact. She stepped into a private conference room where Alexander stood near the window, reviewing a digital report on a tablet. "You shouldn't be here," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Yes, I should," he replied without looking up. The tension in the building was palpable, like static before lightning. "Are they voting him out?" she asked. "Not today," Alexander answered, "but they're drawing blood." He finally turned toward her, and she noticed something different in his expression, not anger. Not urgency, but focus sharpened to a fine edge. "Daniel has been diverting discretionary funds through a subsidiary shell," he continued evenly. "The same subsidiary that released the article about you." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "So the smear was financial?" she asked. "It was strategic," he corrected. He needed public instability to justify consolidating authority. Her stomach tightened. "And the anonymous messages?" "Likely not him," Alexander said, "but someone benefiting from his distraction." A knock interrupted them. An assistant stepped inside, visibly tense. "They're starting." Alexander glanced at Elena. "Stay here." "I'm not fragile," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but this room is controlled." The door closed behind him, leaving her alone with the hum of distant voices filtering through insulated walls. Minutes stretched longer than they should have. She paced once, then stopped, forcing herself into stillness. If she had learned anything, It was that visible agitation became narrative ammunition. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He can't protect you from what's coming. Her pulse spiked sharply this time. Before she could process it, the conference room door opened abruptly. Daniel stepped inside. He looked composed, but there was a crack beneath the surface, now tension drawn tight behind his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he said coldly. "I could say the same to you," she replied. He closed the door behind him, lowering his voice. "You think aligning with my brother makes you untouchable. I'm not aligning," she said evenly. "I'm divorcing you." His jaw flexed. "He's using you to destabilize me. Maybe you destabilized yourself." The silence between them vibrated. "You've embarrassed this family publicly," he continued, voice tightening. "Investors are questioning succession. Father is furious. That sounds like your problem." For a moment, something almost desperate flickered in his expression. "Withdraw the divorce," he said. "Stand beside me in there. We stabilize perception. This ends." The audacity of it stunned her. "You want me as optics," she said softly. "I want you as my wife," he snapped. The distinction mattered. Before she could respond, the door opened again. Alexander stepped inside, expression unreadable but eyes cold. "They're requesting documentation regarding subsidiary transfers," he said calmly to Daniel. "Immediately." Daniel's posture stiffened. "You orchestrated this?" "I presented facts," Alexander replied. The tension between them felt less like sibling rivalry and more like strategic annihilation. Daniel turned to Elena once more. "You have no idea what you're stepping into." "Maybe not," she said quietly. "But I know what I'm stepping out of." Alexander moved closer, not possessively, not theatrically, but with unmistakable alignment. "You're done trying to intimidate her," he said evenly. Daniel's eyes darkened. "You think this ends well for you?" "It ends correctly," Alexander replied. The statement hung in the air like a verdict. A moment later, Daniel was called back into the boardroom. He left without another word, but the look he cast over his shoulder carried something new, calculation edged with volatility. When the door shut again, the silence felt heavier. Elena turned to Alexander slowly. "This is spiraling." "No," he said calmly. "It's surfacing." Her pulse was still racing, but beneath the fear was something steadier. A shift, a realization that she was no longer reacting to events. She was influencing them. "What happens if he loses?" she asked quietly. Alexander's gaze held hers with unwavering certainty. "Then he becomes dangerous." The words settled deep. Outside the conference room, the future of Whitmore Holdings was being negotiated. Inside it, the fracture between brothers had become irreversible. And somewhere in the building, someone else was watching the chaos unfold, waiting for the moment when protection would no longer be enough. The vote did not remove Daniel, it weakened him. That distinction mattered more than headlines. By the end of the emergency board session, Daniel remained CEO but under temporary governance review. His authority over subsidiary transfers was suspended pending audit. Financial oversight was reassigned to a 3-member committee. Publicly, it was framed as precautionary. Internally, it was humiliation. Elena did not see the vote itself. She saw its aftermath. Daniel exited the building through the main doors with cameras flashing in his face, his composure intact but brittle. Alexander left through the side corridor without a single photograph taken. It was strategic invisibility, That evening, Elena's apartment felt too quiet. She stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker alive one by one, trying to untangle the knot forming in her chest. This had escalated faster than she expected. The board's intervention, the subsidiary transfers, the smear campaign, all of it felt like pieces of a design she had stepped into without fully understanding its blueprint. Her phone vibrated. Not a message. A document from an encrypted email address she did not recognize. Subject line, "You deserve the full truth." Her pulse stuttered once. She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a series of financial records, time-stamped transfers, Shell Corporation ownership breakdowns, internal communication logs. The details were complex, but one pattern emerged immediately. The subsidiary Daniel had used to release the article was not fully controlled by him. It had another silent stakeholder, Alexander. Her breath caught. She reread the ownership breakdown twice to ensure she had not misunderstood. 40% Daniel, 30% External Investment Group, 30% Alexander Whitmore. The room seemed to tilt slightly. She opened the attached message thread. Months ago, before she filed for divorce, Alexander had raised concerns in internal correspondence about misuse of public narrative for leverage. Daniel had dismissed him. Heated exchanges followed. Then silence. Her phone rang. Alexander. She stared at the screen for 3 seconds before answering. "You've seen it," he said, not asking. Yes, his tone did not change. "Then you know the subsidiary predates your divorce." "You own part of it," she said quietly. "Yes, you knew about the article's release structure." "Yes, and you didn't tell me." There was no immediate response. Not avoidance. Not justification. Just a measured pause. "I needed confirmation before acting," he said evenly. "You let him smear me publicly," she replied, her voice controlled but edged. "I monitored it," he corrected. The distinction was surgical and infuriating. "You monitored it," she repeated, like an experiment. Silence again, but this time heavier. "You weren't ready to see how far he would go," he said quietly. The words struck harder than accusation. "You decided that for me." "Yes." The admission landed without defense. Anger flared beneath her composure. "You used my vulnerability to expose his recklessness." "I exposed his recklessness because it was inevitable," he replied calmly. "You accelerated the timeline, so I was leverage. You were a catalyst." The repetition of that word now felt less empowering and more manipulative. She turned away from the window, pacing once across the room. "You positioned yourself to take control of the fallout. I positioned myself to contain it, and to weaken him." Yes, there it was. Not denial. Not apology. Truth delivered without cushioning. Her heartbeat pounded against her ribs. Not from fear of Daniel now, but from the realization that Alexander had been playing a longer game. "You could have told me," she said. "You would have hesitated," he replied. And that wasn't convenient. It wasn't strategic. The calm in his voice was not cold. It was consistent. That made it more dangerous. "Were you protecting me?" she asked slowly. "Or were you protecting your position?" A longer silence this time. Then, finally, he answered. Both. The honesty disarmed her, more than any lie could have. "You don't manipulate people emotionally," she said softly. "No, you manipulate outcomes." "Yes." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "Did you want me?" she asked carefully. "Or did you want the advantage I created?" Another pause. When he spoke, his voice was lower. I don't fight for trophies. Her pulse skipped. I fight for alignment. That's not the same as wanting someone. No, he agreed. It isn't. The admission lingered, complicated and raw. She exhaled slowly. You should have told me. Yes, he said quietly. No argument. No defense. Outside, a siren wailed faintly in the distance, blending into the city's restless rhythm. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the anonymous number. You're focusing on the wrong brother. Her blood ran cold. She looked back at the financial document still open on her screen. 30% external investment group. She tapped into the ownership registry. The external group's primary investor name surfaced. A private equity firm with ties to Richard Whitmore. Her breath stopped. Alexander, she said, her voice suddenly sharper. Your father is tied to the subsidiary. There was a shift on the other end of the line, not surprise, but calculation deepening. I suspected, he said. You suspected? Yes, and you didn't tell me that either. I didn't have proof. The implications settled heavily between them. Daniel had not acted alone. Richard had allowed the smear to circulate, not to protect Daniel, to pressure both sons. Elena's pulse pounded harder now, not from betrayal, but from clarity. This isn't about divorce, she whispered. No, Alexander agreed evenly. It never was. Her eyes lifted slowly to the city beyond the glass. This was succession. This was power redistribution. And she had been the spark in a much older war. You said he becomes dangerous if he loses, she said quietly. Yes, what happens if your father loses control? Alexander's voice dropped a fraction. Then he stops playing within rules. The air in the apartment felt charged now, as if something irreversible had just locked into place. Her divorce had fractured a marriage, but it had also destabilized a dynasty. And the most dangerous player had not been Daniel. It had been watching from the beginning. The fallout did not explode. It tightened, 3 days after Elena discovered Rich Whitmore's connection to the subsidiary. Whitmore Holdings received an anonymous regulatory inquiry from the Securities Oversight Commission. The language was clinical, but the implication was devastating. A review into potential internal manipulation of media assets for stock influence. It was the kind of investigation that did not arrest executives immediately, eroded reputations slowly, publicly and irreversibly. Daniel was summoned to provide documentation. Richard issued a statement about corporate transparency. Investors demanded emergency clarification. The stock dipped again. Elena watched the unraveling from a distance that was no longer accidental. She understood now that this war had layers she had not seen when she filed for divorce. She had thought she was escaping a marriage. Instead, she had cracked open a succession battle that had been waiting for ignition. Alexander requested. She'll meet him at his office, not at Whitmore Holdings, but at the headquarters of his own firm across the river. The building was quieter, modern without excess. Glass walls revealing structured calm rather than legacy intimidation. When she stepped inside his private office, the city skyline stretched behind him like something he had earned rather than inherited. You anticipated the regulatory inquiry, she said. Closing the door, yes. You initiated it. Yes. The admission was not defensive. It was precise. Her pulse beat steadily, not erratic anymore. That's escalation. It's containment, he corrected calmly. Before our father weaponizes it further. She studied him for a long moment. You're forcing a fracture. I'm forcing clarity. The difference was subtle, but it mattered. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Daniel. Come to the estate. Now. She showed it to Alexander. He's cornered, he said, evenly, and cornered men make mistakes. Yes. The estate felt colder than it had weeks ago when she last stood there as a wife. The fountains still ran. The chandeliers still glowed. But the illusion of permanence had thinned. Daniel was waiting in his father's study. His tie was loosened, sleeves rolled, composure worn down to something sharper and less controlled. You knew, he said, the moment she stepped inside. Knew what? That Alexander has been building this case for months. You think this is about morality? It's about succession, I know, she said quietly. The admission threw him off balance for a fraction of a second. He's not protecting you, Daniel continued, pacing once. He's using you to destabilize father's influence over the board. Once Richard's grip weakens, Alexander steps in. And where does that leave you? She asked evenly. His jaw tightened. You're being naive. No, she replied calmly. I'm finally being observant. Daniel stopped pacing. Withdraw the divorce. Publicly support me. The narrative shifts. Father stabilizes. Alexander loses momentum. She almost admired the desperation hidden beneath. Strategy. You still think this is about image, she said softly. It is about power, he snapped. The door opened without knock. Alexander entered. The room shifted instantly. Richard stood near the fireplace, silent until now, his expression colder than either son's. You've both embarrassed this family, Richard said evenly. Regulators, media scrutiny, internal fracture. Alexander's gaze did not waver. You tied your own capital to a media subsidiary that manipulated public narrative. It was risk management. Richard replied. It was leverage, Alexander corrected. Elena watched the exchange with steady clarity. This was no longer about loyalty. It was about control of an empire built on influence. Daniel stepped forward. You orchestrated this collapse. I orchestrated transparency, Alexander replied. Richard's eyes shifted to Elena. And you could have remained protected. The word no longer intimidated her. I was never protected, she said quietly. I was contained. Silence followed, thick and irreversible. Richard studied her carefully, recalibrating, perhaps for the first time. The divorce will proceed, he said at last. Quietly, Daniel turned sharply. Father, enough, Richard cut him off. Stability requires sacrifice. The statement landed heavily. Elena realized then that Daniel was not being defended. He was being managed. Her divorce papers would be signed, not because Daniel accepted defeat, but because Richard was shifting weight to preserve legacy. When the meeting ended, Daniel remained in the study, staring at the floor like a man recalculating a future he no longer controlled. Outside, dusk had settled across the estate. Elena stepped onto the terrace for air, heart steady. Alexander followed, stopping beside her. It's done, he said. Yes. There was no triumph in his voice, no visible satisfaction, only resolution. You moved every piece carefully, she said quietly. Yes. And you risked exposure. Yes. She turned to face him fully. Did you do this for balance or for me? His eyes held hers, unguarded in a way they had not before. I would have dismantled him eventually, he said evenly. But I would not have accelerated it without you. Her pulse shifted not from manipulation, but from choice. And now, she asked, now you decide, he replied. Not ownership, not demand decision, the difference settled deeply. Behind them, the Whitmore estate remained illuminated, but its authority felt diminished. The empire had not fallen, but it had been restructured. Elena understood something profound in that moment. Her divorce had not destroyed her. It had exposed fault lines in a dynasty, and standing beside her was not a man who controlled outcomes for dominance, but one who recalibrated power when it tilted too far for the first time since that night in the study when everything broke. She felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not fear, not anger, possibility. And this time it was hers.